The ground is frozen solid. Staff Sergeant James Hendricks presses his cheek against it anyway, and the cold bites through his stubble like a blade. The taste in his mouth is copper and wet earth. Cordate hangs in the air so thick he can almost chew it. 12 yards ahead of him, a German MG-42 machine gun is chewing through a fallen oak tree. At a rate of 12 yards ahead of him, a German MG-42 machine gun is chewing through a fallen oak tree at a rate of 1,200 rounds per minute, the fastest sustained fire weapon fielded by any army on Earth, and the bark is disappearing in ribbons. His unit is gone. Not dead. Not all of them. Gone. Pulled back on orders that came crackling through a radio he no longer has. Orders he heard half of before the runner shouted something that didn't make sense and the men around him started moving the wrong direction. And now it is just Hendricks, the frozen Belgian ground, 2 grenades, his M1 Garand with 6 rounds left in the clip, and the German strongpoint that 3 previous American assaults have failed to crack. The position ahead is a reinforced farmhouse on the edge of Andenne, Belgium, December 26, 1944. What intelligence told his company was a lightly held outpost manned by perhaps 30 Wehrmacht soldiers turned out, as the bodies of the first 2 assault waves proved to be something else entirely. German Fallschirmjäger, paratroopers. The 5th Fallschirmjäger Division, veterans of Monte Cassino and the Scheldt estuary. Soldiers who had held positions against odds that made this one look charitable. The position had been reinforced overnight with a 2nd Meng 42 emplacement, 2 Panzerfaust teams, and a Pak-40 anti-tank gun repositioned at the corner of the stone barn that now covers the entire southern approach. They knew the Americans were coming. They had been waiting. And yet, in a post-war interrogation that would not be declassified for 40 years, a captured German Feldwebel, a staff sergeant of the paratroopers who survived that day, was asked how many American soldiers had attacked his position on December 26th. He stared at the Allied interrogation officer for a long moment before he answered. 1, he said. There was only 1. The officer wrote it down. Then he stopped writing and looked up. 1. The German nodded slowly. His hands, the interrogation report notes, were completely still. The hands of a man who had made peace with something he could not explain. 1. And we could not stop him. Stay with me. Because before we get to what James Hendricks did in the next 4 hours, you need to understand exactly what he was walking into, and why the men trying to kill him later said that they had never, in all of Europe, encountered anything like him. Why the men trying to kill him later, that they had never, James Monroe Hendricks was born on May 25, 1921, in Lepanto, Arkansas. Lepanto in 1921 was a Delta cotton town, flat, hot in summer, bone cold in winter, and the kind of place where a man's worth was measured by how early he rose and how late he quit. James Hendricks rose early. He was the 2nd of 5 children, the son of a sharecropper named Luther Hendricks and a woman named Viola, who kept a small vegetable garden and read the Bible aloud every evening whether anyone would hear it or not. He was not a large man. 5 feet 9 inches, lean through the shoulders. His commanding officer, Captain James Leach of the 4th Armored Division, would later describe him in a letter home as the kind of soldier who doesn't look like much until the moment you need him most, and then he becomes something else entirely. Hendricks enlisted in 1942, the year after Pearl Harbor. He had no particular hatred of Germany or Japan. He had never been farther than Memphis. What he had was a younger brother named Earl who'd been at Bataan. Earl Hendricks survived the death march, but was listed as missing by the time James raised his right hand and took the oath. James Hendricks enlisted because his brother was somewhere in the Pacific in Japanese hands, and sitting in Lepanto pulling cotton while Earl was in a prison camp was simply not something James Hendricks was constitutionally capable of doing. His unit called him Ironback, a nickname born from an incident during training at Fort Benning when a drill sergeant ordered the company to hold a prone position for 45 minutes as punishment for a latrine infraction no one admitted to. Every man eventually rolled, shifted, or rose. Hendricks did not move for the full 45 minutes. When the drill sergeant finally let them up, he stood over Hendricks and said, "Boy, you got iron in your spine." The name stuck. He carried two things into every operation. The first was his M1 Garand, which he had cleaned so many times the bluing had worn from the barrel. The second was a letter. A single page folded into quarters, tucked into the left breast pocket of his field jacket, closest to his heart. It was the last letter Earl had sent before Bataan fell. In it, Earl wrote, "Don't you come looking for me, James. Stay home and look after Mama." James Hendricks had done neither. James Hendrick had done neither. But he had kept the letter. He would keep it against his chest through everything that was coming. This video gives you the story, but the Combat Blueprint, our free newsletter, gives you everything that doesn't fit in a video. Deeper details. Forgotten heroes. Free to join. 10 seconds to sign up. Link in the description. Now back in the video. The briefing for December 26th took place in a frozen church outside Remain, Belgium, at 0400 hours. Captain Leach spread the map across the communion table. The objective was a German-held farmhouse complex on the northern edge of Andenne, a cluster of 3 stone buildings that commanded a crossroads critical to the German salient's supply corridor. G2 intelligence, sourced from aerial reconnaissance and a Belgian civilian contact code named MAR-CEE, assessed the garrison at between 20 and 30 Wehrmacht infantry, lightly armed, with 1 machine gun position and no anti-tank assets. The defensive posture was described as hasty, improvised, and unlikely to withstand a coordinated assault by a reinforced platoon. The company was going in with 31 men. What G2 had failed to account for, what MAR-CEE had either not known or had not been able to report, was what happened at that farmhouse on the night of December 25th. The 5th Fallschirmjäger Division's 15th Regiment had been in retreat since St. Vithischen. They were not routed, they were withdrawing in good order, and their regimental commander, Oberst Friedrich August Freiherr von der Heide, was a professional soldier of the first rank. Von der Heide had commanded the Crete paratroop assault in 1941. He had led his men through North Africa, Normandy, and the Ardennes. When his regiment passed through Andenne on Christmas night, he looked at that farmhouse, stone walls 2 feet thick, clear fields of fire to the east and south, a barn positioned to anchor a secondary defensive line. And he made a decision. He left a reinforced company behind, 73 men, 2 MiG-42 emplacements, a Pak-40 anti-tank gun, 2 Panzerfaust teams, a Pak-40 anti-tank gun, 2 Panzerfaust teams, and a Feldwebel named Klaus Brandt, who had been decorated at Casino and who understood, as well as any soldier alive in December 1944, how to make a stone building into a fortress that felt like the end of the world to the men attacking it. The American platoon walked into this at 7,000 faus, in fog on frozen ground. The first squad to approach the southern field never made it to the fence line. The MG-42 in the barn corner opened up at 200 meters and scythed through the lead element in under 8 seconds. 3 men down before anyone fired back. The second squad tried to flank left into the woodline and walked directly into the Panzerfaust team hidden in a drainage ditch. 1 man killed, 1 wounded severely, the squad sergeant screaming for a medic who was already treating someone else. Hendricks was in the third element, pushing toward the eastern approach through a hedgerow when the radio crackled. The voice was headquarters company. The order was immediate. Withdraw. All units, withdraw to the Remain line. The battalion is redirecting to Bastogne. Repeat, withdraw all elements immediately. Hendricks looked up. Through the hedge, he could see Corporal Davis, 20 years old, from Evansville, Indiana, pinned behind a stone fence post 20 meters into the open field, wounded in the leg, unable to move. Beyond Davis, barely visible in the fog, was the farmhouse, and in the gap between the barn and the main building, half hidden behind a rusted plow, something moved that was not a soldier. Something small. The height of a child, the rest of the platoon was already pulling back. Sergeant Ferris grabbed Hendricks' shoulder. "Orders, James. Let's go." Hendricks looked at Davis. He looked at the gap by the plow. He handed Ferris his radio. "Take it," he said. "I'm already too far in." He was not too far in. He was not too far in. He was on a clear path to the rear, but Davis was bleeding in the open field, and something small was hiding behind that plow, and a position still needed to be taken, and James Hendricks had iron in his spine. He checked his Garand. 8 rounds. 2 grenades, his M19 weapon pistol, with 1 full magazine. He inventoried his water, half a canteen, frozen at the edges. His left arm had been grazed by a splinter of wood when the MG-42 opened up. He had not noticed until now. He pressed his palm flat against it and moved forward. He was alone. The mission was still active. He comes through the hedge at a crawl, using the dead ground between the frozen furrows, and for the first 60 seconds after his unit disappears into the fog behind him, the battlefield is almost silent. Then Feldwebel-Klaus Brandt, commanding the farmhouse position from the 2nd floor of the main building, does what a professional soldier does when the assault inexplicably stops. He consolidates. Brandt is a compact man, 31 years old, with a voice like ground glass and a reputation his men have spent 3 years earning confidence from. He has held positions at Monte Cassino against British, Indian, and New Zealand troops. He held a canal crossing near the Scheldt against the Canadians for 6 days. He knows how an assault looks when it collapses, and he knows how it looks when it pauses to regroup. He moves from window to window of the farmhouse, directing his men with hand signals and brief, precise commands. He repositions the 2nd MG-42 to cover the eastern hedge. He sends a 2-man team to sweep the southern field for wounded Americans who might be feigning incapacitation. He is doing everything right. His grenadier Erwin Vogel, 23 years old, from Hanover, deployed since Normandy, occupying the reinforced cellar window of the barn, tracks the eastern hedge line through the iron sights of his Karabiner 98K. Vogel has a gift for patience. He has been lying behind that rifle since A500. His breathing is controlled. His trigger finger rests along the guard, not on it. He is waiting. Hendricks doesn't come through the hedge. He comes up through the drainage ditch on the north side, the ditch the Panzerfaust team used, now empty, the team having expended both rounds in the earlier assault and withdrawn to resupply. It is 60 meters from the barn's blind corner. The MG-42 cannot depress far enough to cover it. Vogel cannot see it from the cellar window. Hendricks gets to within 40 meters of the barn before the trap springs. A German soldier positioned in a concealed scrape pit, a hasty fighting position dug into the ground and covered with a wooden door and frozen mud, rises directly to his left at 8 meters. The muzzle of a Mustian Pistol 40 is level with Hendricks's chest. The ambush is perfect. At 8 meters with an MP40, James Hendricks should die in the next quarter second. What he does instead makes no tactical sense. He drops his rifle. He drops straight down, not left or right, straight down onto his back. And the burst from the MP40 passes through the space his chest occupied a third of a second earlier. From his back, flat on frozen ground, he draws his M1911 and fires twice, controlled, into the scrape pit. The German soldier, later identified as Jutz Heinrich Müller, 19 years old, falls without another sound. Hendricks is back on his feet in 3 seconds. He recovers his Garand. He is shaking, not from fear, not yet, but from the adrenaline surge of a death that passed close enough to feel its breath. But here is what he saw in the fraction of a second before he dropped. The German soldier had risen from a position he could not have occupied since before the assault began. He had been there before Hendricks even entered the field. Brandt had pre-positioned him, not as a flanking element, but as a backstop, covering the exact approach that the drainage ditch created. Brandt had planned for this. He had read the ground and anticipated the only blind approach to his position, and he had covered it. What he had not planned for, what his training at Casino and the Scheldt had never required him to plan for, was a man who had already mapped that position and was now using the dead German's fighting scrape as cover for his next move. What James Hendricks did in the next 90 seconds made no tactical sense, until you understand what he had already seen that no one else on that battlefield could see. He uses the dead German's scrape pit. He drops into it, the body is still warm, and he lies still for a count of 20. And he listens. This is the thing that Hendricks does that his platoon mates have never fully understood, and his officers have stopped trying to explain. He stops. In the middle of a firefight with men dying and positions shifting and time dissolving, James Hendricks goes completely still and he listens. Inside the farmhouse 40 meters away, something has changed. He can hear it. Voices. German voices, sharp and urgent, at a pitch that is different from the commanded discipline of 10 minutes ago. The second MG-42 has stopped firing, not because it ran out of ammunition, because someone ordered it stopped to listen. They don't know where he is. Feldwebel Brandt is at the second-floor window, and he is scanning the eastern hedge, the southern field, the drainage ditch approach. His radio operator, Funker Otto Kern, is trying to raise the Panzerfaust team for an updated position report. The team doesn't answer. Brandt looks at Kern. Kern looks at his radio. And for the first time since 0500 that morning, Feldwebel Klaus Brandt, veteran of 3 campaigns, decorated soldier of the Third Reich, asks a question he has never had to ask before. Wie viele Amerikaner sind noch dras before? How many Americans are still out there? No one answers him. Hendricks moves. He reaches the barn's blind corner at a sprint, hugging the stone wall, and the MG-42 in the main position opens up a half-second too late. He presses himself flat against the stone. He can feel the vibration of the gun through the wall. He has 1 grenade and 6 rounds left in his Garand. Through a gap in the barn door, rotted wood, the latch broken, he can see into the interior. 2 German soldiers, one at the far window covering the south field, one near the door, reloading. He does not throw the grenade yet, because between the 2 German soldiers huddled behind an overturned wooden feed trough is a woman. She is perhaps 40 years old. She is wearing a dark wool coat that has been torn at the shoulder. She is holding something against her chest with both arms. It takes Hendricks a full second to understand what it is. A child. Perhaps 4 years old. Face hidden against her mother's coat. The woman's name, Hendricks would not learn until after the war, was Marguerite Collignon. She was a Belgian farmer's wife. She had been in the barn feeding the last surviving cow when the German soldiers arrived on Christmas night, and she had been too frightened to run and too determined to leave without her daughter Celine, who had been sleeping in the hay. Hendricks stands at the gap in the barn door, and he makes a calculation in the space of 2 heartbeats. He cannot throw the grenade. He cannot fire through the door. The angles are wrong. One of the 2 German soldiers has a clear sight line to the trough, and if the shooting starts, if they hear him, the first instinct of a panicking soldier is to fire at the nearest target. Marguerite Collignon and her daughter are the nearest target. He changes his plan. It will cost him 3 minutes. In 3 minutes, Brandt will reorient his defense. In 3 minutes, the window he has on the blind corner closes. He goes around. He circles the barn to the opposite end, finds a second gap, a missing plank near the foundation, and he goes to ground and waits. He whistles. A single note, low, like a man calling a dog. The 2 German soldiers react exactly as he calculated. The one near the door moves toward the sound. The one at the window turns from the south field to look at his comrade. In the 2 seconds they are both oriented away from the trough. Hendricks pushes through the gap, crosses the interior on his hands and knees, and pulls Marguerite Collignon by the wrist. She does not scream. Whatever she has been through in the past 18 hours has moved her past screaming. He gets her and the child through the gap and into the frozen field behind the barn before the German soldiers realize what happened. It cost him 4 minutes, and a torn wound in his right hand where the broken plank caught him. He is now operating with one functional hand, 6 rounds, 1 grenade, and no element of surprise left at all. He presses his bleeding hand flat against the frozen ground. He makes himself stop shaking. At the midpoint of the assault on the main building, when Hendricks sprints from the barn corner toward the farmhouse door and, instead of attacking the door, swerves hard left and throws himself prone behind the stone water trough, it looks to any observer like a mistake, like a man who lost his nerve at the last second, like someone who panicked. Feldwell-Brand thinks exactly this. He orders the first-floor riflemen to hold their fire. He watches the American soldier lying motionless behind the trough. He waits for the surrender. What he doesn't see is what Hendricks is looking at from ground level, a thin wire, almost invisible against the frozen mud, running from the farmhouse door to a stake in the ground 15 feet to the left. A tripwire, connected, as he understands the moment he traces it with his eyes, to a shoe mine positioned against the door frame. Brand had mined his own entrance. Hendricks doesn't explain this to anyone. He lies behind the trough and catalogues what he now knows, and he puts it together with everything else he's seen since entering that drainage ditch, and the solution assembles itself with a clarity that cuts right through the cold and the blood loss and the exhaustion. Don't explain it yet. Let it sit. He is behind the stone trough, and he cannot move. Not will not. Cannot. His right hand has stopped working properly. The torn muscle in his palm has seized, and when he tries to grip the Garand, the fingers close only halfway. He transfers the rifle to his left hand and discovers that his left arm, where the wood splinter grazed it 3 hours ago, has stiffened in the cold. He can lift it, he cannot hold it steady. He has not slept in 31 hours. He has not had water since the frozen half canteen, which is now empty. He is lying on ground that is stealing heat from his body at a rate he can feel, and somewhere in the last 90 minutes he stopped feeling his feet. He reaches into his left breast pocket. The letter is still there. The paper is damp but intact. He doesn't unfold it. He's read it so many times the words are in him now, not on the page. He just touches it through the fabric. "Don't you come looking for me, James." Earl, his little brother, somewhere in a Japanese prison camp, 2 years without a letter out, 2 years without a letter in, possibly dead. Hendricks has made himself live with the possibility, without letting it settle into certainty, because the day he accepts Earl as dead is the day he stops having a reason for any of this. He thinks about the order to withdraw. He could have gone. He chose not to, and that was not heroism. It was stubbornness dressed up in tactical language. Davis was pinned in the field, and then Davis was not pinned anymore because someone had pulled him back. And Hendricks hadn't noticed because by then he was already too deep, and moving forward was the only direction left. He had told himself he was staying for Davis and for the mission, and because he was too far in to retreat safely, and maybe one of those things was true. He looks at the gap behind the barn where Marguerite Cullinan and her daughter disappeared into the tree line. The woman had not said a word. She had gripped his sleeve for exactly 1 second before she ran, a grip so brief and so fierce it left its own kind of mark, and then she was gone into the trees with the child's face still hidden in her coat. That, he thinks, is enough. He reaches into his jacket pocket and finds what he put there 3 months ago and has never used, a morphine syringe. He looks at it for a long time. He puts it back. He presses his bleeding right hand flat against the cold earth until the shaking stops. He gets up. He knows the door is mined. He knows from Muller's body in the scrape pit that Brand prepositions assets along anticipated approach routes. He knows from the MG-42's position that the second-floor window commands the south field, but has a dead angle to the north wall. He knows that the trough he's been hiding behind is 15 meters from that north wall. He knows one more thing. That irrational move, sprinting toward the door and then swerving left, going to ground behind the trough, had not been a mistake or a loss of nerve. It had been reconnaissance. He had needed a ground-level view of the door approach to confirm what he suspected about the tripwire, and he had gotten it. The swerve was deliberate. The prone position was deliberate. He had used Brandt's own expectation of American panic against him. He low crawls 15 meters to the north wall. His right hand is a fist he has forced closed around the Garand's stock. His left arm is trembling at the shoulder. He reaches the wall and presses against it and listens. Inside, Feldwebel Brandt is talking, fast. The tone is no longer the ground-glass command voice. It is higher, not quite panic, but the voice of a man whose model of the battle itself. Wo zum Teufel ist er? Wo zum Teufel ist er? Where is he? Where in hell is he? Erwin Vogel in the cellar window answers, Ich weiß es nicht, Feldwebel. I don't know, Sergeant. Wie viele sind draußen? How many are outside? No answer. Hendricks moves to the north window. A small opening, shuttered with wooden boards that have warped in the Belgian winter and left a 4-inch gap at the base. He can see through it into the ground floor. 4 German soldiers, Brand at the far wall, oriented toward the south. 3 others in various positions, all watching the windows and the door and the angles they have been trained to watch. None of them are watching the north wall. He throws the grenade through the gap in the north window shutter. He is already moving before it detonates, running to the east side of the building, where a low stone addition was built against the main wall, and using it as a stepping stone to reach a second-floor window that Brandt's defense has left uncovered because it is too high to assault from the ground. For a man with one working hand and a stiff left arm and feet, he cannot feel. The 6-foot climb onto the stone addition takes every physical reserve he has left. The grenade detonates. He goes through the second-floor window. What happens in the next 4 minutes is documented in the after-action report filed by Captain James Leach on December 27, 1944, and later cited in its entirety in the Medal of Honor recommendation submitted by the 4th Armored Division. The language of after-action reports is formal and stripped of sensation, but what it describes is this. Staff Sergeant James Hendricks, operating without support, entered the principal building of the German defensive position through a second-floor window immediately following a diversionary grenade, neutralized the first-floor defensive element with his M1 Garand, located and disarmed a shoe mine at the primary entrance, cleared the cellar, and received the surrender of 2 remaining German soldiers, including Feldwebel Klaus Brandt, at approximately 10:45 hours. The after-action report is accurate, but it does not convey what those 4 minutes sounded like from the inside. He moved. He fired. He broughed. He moved again. 30 meters of corridor. 20. 10. A staircase. A door. A cellar window with a rifle pointing through it, and a man behind it who had been pointing rifles at people since 1941, and who, at this moment, when the shadow of James Hendricks fell across his position from above, lowered the rifle. Erwin Vogel lowered his rifle. He put his hands up. He said nothing. He would later describe this moment in a post-war interview published in a German veterans magazine in 1961 as the single most frightening experience of his life, more frightening than Casino, more frightening than Normandy. Feldwebel Klaus Brandt was in the southeast corner of the ground floor, behind an overturned table, when Hendricks came down the stairs. He had his pistol in his hand. He did not raise it. Ich ergebe mich, he said. I surrender. 1 sentence of silence after the last weapon was set down. The farmhouse at Andenne was quiet for the first time since Christmas Eve. Outside, through the warped wood of the north window shutter, the Belgian countryside lay under its snow. Indifferent, enormous, continuing. The first Americans to reach the farmhouse after Hendricks fired a signal flare were from Baker Company, arriving 40 minutes later when the battalion's reorientation brought a relief force back through the Andenne crossroads. What they found was documented by Lieutenant Harold Gruber in a letter to his wife that was published, in part, in a 1986 collection of GI correspondence. He wrote, "We came in through the gate, and there were 7 dead Germans in the farmhouse and the barn combined, and 2 prisoners sitting with their hands behind their heads in the main room, and 1 American sergeant sitting on the floor with his back against the wall and his rifle across his knees, and a piece of cloth tied around his right hand that was soaked completely through with blood. He looked up at us and said, "Position is clear." That was all he said. Position is clear. That was all he said. The PaK-40 anti-tank gun was intact. The 2 MG-42 emplacements were captured with remaining ammunition. The Anden crossroads, the objective of the operation, was open. 1 man had done this. At a 3rd Army prisoner processing facility 2 days later, Feldwebel Klaus Randt was formally interrogated by a military intelligence officer. The interrogation transcript, declassified in 1984 and held in the National Archives, contains the following exchange. Interrogator: How many American soldiers attacked your position on the morning of the 26th? Brand: 1. After the initial assault withdrew, there was only 1. Interrogator: 1 soldier took your entire position. Brand: Yes. Interrogator: What did you think was happening during the assault? Wand: Yes. Interrogator. A pause is noted in the transcript. The interrogating officer recorded it as approximately 8 seconds. Brand: I thought he was the advance element of a battalion. I thought there must be 50 men using him as a scout. I thought we all thought that no man would move as he moved unless he had an entire company supporting him. We could not accept that there was only 1. We wasted our ammunition firing at positions he had already left. Interrogator: What do your men say about him? Interrogator: What do your men say about him? Brand T: They called him der Einzelteufel, the lone devil. Vogel gave him the name, I think, after the cellar. He said the man came out of the ceiling like something that had no business being there, like a thing that had simply decided it would not obey the rules of what is possible. Owen Vogel, in his 1961 magazine account, was more specific. He described the moment Hendricks appeared above the cellar window. I had my rifle. I had a clear shot. I had trained for exactly that moment for 3 years, and I lowered my rifle. I have asked myself many times why I did that. I believe, it was because in that moment I understood that I had already lost. Not that the battle was lost. That I had already lost, personally, to this specific man. He had survived everything we prepared for him. He had come through the impossible, and he was still coming. What is the point of shooting at Singer? The civilians spoke through a Belgian Red Cross report filed in January 1945. Marguerite Collion's statement, translated from French, reads, "He came through the barn wall like a ghost. He moved without speaking. He took my wrist, and he pulled, and I understood that I had to run, so I ran. He saved my daughter's life. He saved my daughter's life. He saved my life. I do not know his name. I did not ask. In the moment, a name seemed like a very small thing. Celine. Could not have asked. In the moment the mode was fair. She was holding, her mother noted, a cloth doll with button eyes. She had not made a single sound throughout the entire ordeal. On June 13, 1945, at a ceremony at Fort Benning, Georgia, Staff Sergeant James Monroe Hendricks of Lepanto, Arkansas, was awarded the Medal of Honor by the United States Army for his actions at Anden, Belgium, on December 26, 1944. The official citation reads, in part, Staff Sergeant Hendricks, on his own initiative and without support, fearlessly assaulted a heavily fortified enemy position manned by a superior force of Fallschirmjäger infantry, personally neutralized multiple defended emplacements, disarmed a demolition device at the principal entry point, and secured the surrender of the garrison commander and remaining defenders, capturing the position intact. His extraordinary heroism and complete disregard for his personal safety were in keeping with the highest standards of military service and reflect the greatest credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. Military citation language is spare by design. It strips the flesh from the bone of what happened and presents the skeleton. What it cannot convey is the smell of the farmhouse. What it cannot convey is Erwin Vogel lowering a rifle because he had already understood something that had nothing to do with training. What it cannot convey is a woman gripping a stranger's sleeve for 1 second in the dark. Hendricks came home to Lepanto in the summer of 1945. He did not speak publicly about December 26th for more than 30 years. When a local newspaper reporter asked him about it in 1948, he said, "I did what needed doing. Other men did more and didn't come home. I'd rather talk about them." He never read the German interrogation transcript. It was declassified 11 years after his death. He learned in 1946 that his brother Earl was alive. Earl Hendricks had survived 3.5 years as a Japanese prisoner of war and came home weighing 94 pounds. The two brothers met at the Memphis train station on a Thursday morning. Neither of them has ever described that meeting to anyone who wrote it down. The capture of the Anden crossroads on December 26, 1944, allowed Third Army logistics to maintain their resupply corridor during the final phase of the Battle of the Bulge. Whether a single crossroads position was decisive in a battle of that scale is a question for operational historians. What is not a question is what the men of Baker Company found when they came through that gate and saw one sergeant with his back against the wall and a bloody rag on his hand. They knew what they were looking at. They just didn't have a word for it yet. The Germans did. Der Einzelteufel. The Lone Devil. Let's stay here for a moment. Just for a moment. He was given intelligence that was wrong. Every piece of it. The numbers, the route, the strength of the position. All of it wrong. The plan he walked in with was gone within the first 60 seconds of contact with reality. He'd been handed a map of a battlefield that didn't exist, and he had to build a new map with his hands and his eyes and his still body listening in the dark. His orders changed at the worst possible moment. The radio crackled and his unit went one direction and he went another, and that decision, which was not entirely rational, which was not fully justified by any tactical doctrine, was the one that brought him to that farmhouse. An ambush was waiting for him that should have ended everything. 8 meters, an MP-40, a perfectly executed ambush by a trained soldier, and what saved him was not heroism. It was the fact that his body knew what to do before his mind did, and he had trained it to know. And then there were civilians. A woman and a child in a barn in Belgium on the day after Christmas, caught between armies that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with them at the same time. He slowed down. He risked his approach. He bled more than he needed to because he went around instead of through. He did not choose to leave them there. This was not a choice he agonized over. There was no agonizing. There was only a woman and a child and a gap in the barn wall. That is who he was. That is what Lepanto, Arkansas, and a brother's letter and 31 hours without sleep had made him. And then, the extraordinary part, the men who tried to kill him could not stop talking about him when it was over. Not because he was a symbol, not because he was invincible. Because he was invincible. Because he was a single human being who had simply decided, somewhere in the frozen mud between a drainage ditch and a stone barn, that the world was going to have to work considerably harder to stop him than it had managed so far. If you are a veteran watching this, you know this weight. You know the moment when the plan dissolves and you are standing in the middle of what used to be an objective and is now just ground, and there is no one telling you what to do next, and you have to find the thing inside yourself that was always there and access it without ceremony and without acknowledgement and without anyone will ever know what it cost you. You know what it is to fold a letter and put it against your chest. And if you've never worn a uniform, understand this. James Hendricks was not remarkable before December 26, 1944. He was a sharecropper's son from a Delta town who rose early and quit late and kept a letter in his pocket. What he carried into that Belgian farmhouse was not superhuman. It was human. Profoundly, specifically, stubbornly human. He kept the letter. His whole life, he kept it. When he died on August 13, 2004 in Lepanto, Arkansas, at the age of 83, that same folded page, Earl's letter, the one that said, "Don't come looking for me," was found in the drawer of his bedside table. He had kept the promise he refused to keep, and he had kept it anyway. His brother came home. He came home. Both of them made it back to Arkansas and lived long lives, and those long lives were possible because of one morning in Belgium when a man pressed his hands flat against the frozen earth until they stopped shaking and then stood up. The last thing the German veteran Erwin Vogel wrote at the end of his 1961 account was this: "I think of him sometimes, the American. I do not know his name. I know only that he decided something on that morning, in that field, that we were not able to answer. I have never decided anything that way. I am not sure most men can. But I think he knew, by the end of it, that he could. And that is a thing no one can take from you. He was right. No one ever did." If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you never miss these forgotten stories of extraordinary American courage. Who should we tell next? Drop their name in the comments. Drop their name,